Hi, I'm Cathy Tombaugh, and today I'm so excited to welcome Jarell Myers, who's a PhD in clinical psychology with the Center for Motivation Change and the CMC Foundation for Change. Dr. Myers has expertise in working with adolescents and young adults with anxiety and substance use disorders and adopts a harm reduction approach when appropriate. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Myers.
Thank you so much for having me, Cathy. I'm really looking forward to speaking today. And please feel free to call me Jarell.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so could you just share, I just touched on your background, but if you could share some of your background, why you decided to become a psychologist, and then come into the substance use field.
Sure. So I would say that I tripped and fell into psychology because going all the way back to my undergraduate years, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And my mother suggested taking psychology classes and possibly having it as a major. And I got to my junior year of college and took a class called abnormal psychology and fell in love with the field. We were learning all about the different disorders. And so we had a chance to do more of a deep dive. And it felt like this was the area that I wanted to get into. Initially, when I started grad school, I thought that I wanted to work strictly with adults and did a training opportunity at a hospital with adolescents and young adults and fell in love with working with them. It just felt as if things clicked really well. So I made the decision to stick with that as my specialty. Um, After grad school, I got my first job in Massachusetts working at McLean Hospital. And while I was there, I worked in a clinic that was focused on helping adolescents and children who were experiencing intense anxiety. And our goal there was to help them challenge their anxiety, face their fears, and get to a place where they were living the lives that they wanted to live. And I loved being there. I loved every second of it. It was an amazing experience. However, one of the issues that came up for me was the fact that a lot of the adolescents that would come on our wait list would be using substances. And a lot of the times they were using substances because they didn't know how to deal with the anxiety that they were experiencing. And so as a result of that, they would be encouraged to go and manage their substance use first and get that under control, and then they could come back and join our program. And that felt very unfair to me because they didn't necessarily have the tools to be able to deal with their anxiety. And oftentimes, if they did, they probably wouldn't have been using in the first place. And it would have been, I thought, very difficult to ask them to stop using completely and maintain that level of sobriety for a span of 6 weeks and then come and deal with their anxiety. It just felt as if it was an impossible task to ask of those adolescents. And so it felt as if there was a population of adolescents who were not getting served as well as they could have been. So I made the decision to return to New York and I joined the Center for Motivation and Change with the goal of taking my experience with anxiety treatment and applying it to the way in which we look at substance use at the Center for Motivation and Change, combine those two things, and then go out and help these adolescents who I thought were kind of getting left by the wayside. So that's a shortened version of how I've gotten into this field.
Great. No, that makes a lot of sense too. I think I've heard that, working on both areas. Yeah. And I could see how that would be frustrating to see these kids struggling and they can't get the help that they really want. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So you all at CMC have started the Invitation to Change, which is great. And first of all, I was thinking, as I was getting with it, brilliant name. I love the name because I think parents are like, yes, give me that invitation. I need that. And so can you just talk a little bit about this? Now we have craft, and then it's involved into the Invitation to Change. So kind of the similarities, the differences, what's been added in, and how parents can benefit from this approach.
Absolutely. So I think as it stands right now, there are a bunch of different ways that parents, families, caregivers could look at or approach dealing with substance use with their loved ones, with their adolescents. And what we wanted to do at CMC was provide another option, a different approach. So the way in which we were thinking about it is, can we take the knowledge that we have as clinicians, as psychologists, the skills that we learned over time? Can we take that scientific piece? Can we add in a piece around kindness, around how to be kind to yourself and how to be kind to your loved one through this really difficult period of time? Can we combine those two things and provide a product to the everyday person that they can use when they are coming up against struggles that their loved ones may be going through? So you mentioned craft, and what we wanted to do was take pieces of craft, pieces of motivational interviewing, pieces of acceptance and commitment therapy, combine all of those things together into one package, and and develop this program that we could present to professionals, to parents and families or caregivers, to individuals who may be struggling with substances themselves, to pretty much anybody who would come across this issue. Could we provide them with a package that they could use in their everyday lives? And so we came up with the invitation to change. And the idea behind it is, we want to create an environment where loved ones are helping to invite and motivate their their loved one, the individual who may be struggling with substances, to change their behaviors, to think about things a little bit differently, to explore and experiment with other behaviors that could be helpful for them or more helpful for them than their substance use has been thus far. And we built the invitation to change off of four different tenets. The idea that we want to increase understanding, that we want to increase our own self-awareness, that we want to act, we want to take all the tools that we have and create an environment for that helps motivate change. So how do we do that? The way that we communicate with our loved one, and what sort of behaviors do we want to encourage versus discourage? And then in addition to that, ensuring that we're practicing this, right? It has taken me years to get to this point where I have a really good understanding of all these different skill sets. But I'm not in the household with any of these families. I can't be there 24/7 teaching them or helping them with every little thing. But if we can help them learn these skills and help them to apply it appropriately through practicing these skills, then we're increasing the likelihood that these parents and these caregivers and these friends and family members are motivating their loved one to move towards change as opposed to staying where they are. And the issue here is that, if I'm being 100% honest, there's nothing that works as well short term in relieving distress as substances. There's nothing that I can provide as a clinician that's going to work as well as that or as effectively as that. The issue, of course, though, is that substances don't exist on their own. They come with a whole bunch of baggage. And when we're using and abusing substances, it takes a toll or it affects us in different ways, ways that help to move us away from our values or the things that are really important to us. So we want to be able to help loved ones learn that even though you've accumulated this skill set around your substance use, that there are other things that we can help you do that can meet the criteria that you're looking for it to meet, maybe not as effectively, but that those things still move you towards your values.
I appreciate that. And I do see, yeah, I think it's great to have that whole piece, especially at the beginning of that. I've been doing my groups, and at the beginning where you really focus on a lot of the understanding and self-awareness
Mhm.
and I think parents, the reaction's been great. They are like, oh, this, okay,
Mhm.
I'm gonna just I always think of it as like, just step back, take a breath, and then let's just kind of look at the big picture. But no, it's very well put together. And I think you all did a wonderful job with it. And I know for a fact that parents are finding it very helpful. So it's all good. Yeah. And I mainly just work
Awesome.
with parents. I mean, it could be for any family member, but my group is mainly parents. So, okay.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so one of the things when I talk to parents that comes up a lot is anxiety. I hear that word a lot. My child has anxiety. I think that's why they're using and all of that. So you've touched on that a little bit. Can you share some thoughts about anxiety and substance use disorder and where can families help with this? It just seems to be, especially in the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, so fear is one of our base emotions as humans. It comes with the package, right? It has developed over time, we've evolved over time, and so fear has sort of stuck with us. There's no issue with fear, right? Fear is actually very helpful and has been very helpful for our survival. I work in New York City. Taxi drivers aren't the best in New York City. And if I wasn't necessarily fearful about crossing the street, I I might be more likely to get hurt crossing the street as opposed to me being fearful, looking both ways, making sure that nothing is bearing down on me and quickly moving across the street. Back in the day, it was great for if a lion was chasing us or a bear looked like it was hunting us down, or looking over the edge of a cliff and not wanting to jump off to see what was at the bottom, right? Fear has been very effective at keeping us as a species alive. The issue is that when fear exists over a longer period of time, one, and two, when it is associated with things that are not actually dangerous, not innately dangerous, it becomes this mood state called anxiety. And the issue with anxiety is that it gets in the way or it stops us from doing the things that we should, as humans, be able to typically do. In addition to that, because of how developed our brains are, we also begin to adapt anxiety to more abstract thinking. So think of it as, I'm getting nervous about something that's going to happen in the future. Like next week, I'm going to have to give a talk in front of a bunch of people. I'm getting nervous about that. And I might become so anxious about it that I might bail out of it or not show up or get stage fright in the midst of it and lose all my words and not be able to speak. It's not a situation that is innately dangerous, but we become very fearful of that type of thing. And so the goal with any sort of anxiety treatment that there is to help the individual face their fears. I want you to be able to do the things that you have become fearful of so that you're teaching your body two things. One, that if I am feeling afraid of something, it doesn't mean that I need to stop doing that thing. I don't like roller coasters. I'm not a big fan of them. Does that mean that I should not ride a roller coaster? Absolutely not. I should still be able to ride a roller coaster. People ride them every day. But my fear should not be the lone judgmental factor in me moving forward or staying stationary. I should be able to be in charge of that decision for myself. And if I'm experiencing fear, it doesn't mean that that is the final decision maker. It means that I can take everything into account and move forward. That feeling, that internalized feeling of fear, should not be a stop sign. It should more so be a suggestion. Hey, pay attention to this, and that's it. Now, I mentioned earlier that for someone who is using substances, that there is nothing that relieves distress short term as well as substances. Now, we've all experienced anxiety, we've all experienced fear. There's nothing that feels good about it. It feels pretty bad inside our bodies.
Mhm.
So it would make sense that we use some sort of substance to help ourselves feel better or help ourselves not think about that thing that is making us experience that fear, right? If you had a headache, you probably could take an aspirin for it. It would make sense that you'd want to take the aspirin for it because you want to get rid of that painful experience. Very similarly here, people have grown accustomed to using a substance as a means of dealing with their anxiety or dealing with their fear. So it can be very difficult to pull those two things apart because they have built up such a strong relationship. But I think that if we are going to help people treat their fears, if you're a parent who is looking to help your adolescent who's experiencing anxiety, similar to the way that you would with a toddler when they're learning to walk, encourage them to do so, even if they keep falling, even if they kind of land on their butts. We want to also encourage our adolescents to keep being brave, to face the things that they're being fearful of. And that can be a really hard thing to do because it can feel as if it goes against what may be best for our loved one. I may be asking someone to, I don't know, walk into a school when they're feeling really fearful about walking to school. Or I could be asking someone to go up and talk to somebody when they're feeling really fearful about talking to someone. And you can see the pain that they may be experiencing and the hesitancy that they may be having. But if I'm thinking about it as a behavior that I want to change, I want them to move towards doing that thing that may be difficult for them because I want them to teach their bodies and their minds that as difficult as this may be in the moment, you're capable, you're able to do this thing. You just have to be brave enough to take that first step, and then the second step, and then the third step towards that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love the part where you mentioned too, the fear is shouldn't be a stop sign. It should be a suggestion, and I think sometimes we get fear. It's like, oh, I can't do this, and depending on how severe it is. And so just on a quick follow-up, do you feel like there's more adolescent fear now and anxiety, or do you think it's just we're noticing it more, or how do you feel about that? Do you think it's coming up more now with kids?
So the answer to both of your questions, I would say is yes. I think
Okay.
we are noticing it a lot more, and I think there may be more anxiety just present overall. I think asking someone to live in a world where they've been certain of some things and now all of that gets shaken up is very difficult. And it makes sense that it would create a lot more uncertainty about things that we assumed were constant and now are not constant. So, for instance, up to the age of 15, this adolescent has lived in a world where they're able to socialize with everyone and there isn't concern about them dying from an illness or a pandemic of illness or anything like that. And now, between the ages of 15 and 17, all of that has changed. There's this concern that their life is constantly at risk, or they could be putting family members at risk. Being in the school environment has changed so much. At one point in time, you were in school, then you weren't in school, then you had to be in school with a mask, then maybe you got pulled out of school because somebody at school got sick and things had to shut down again. So there's been all this uncertainty, all of this stuff that makes what life has been feel completely different now. And when all of that uncertainty creeps in, it can be hard for us to deal with. If you've lived for 20, 30, 40 years, it's difficult and you've had a little bit more time, so you may be able to adjust a little bit more effectively than someone who is really young and who hasn't been around for that long. And everything in their world has just changed, right? So I think overall there's a lot more anxiety because people are feeling uncertain about things and they don't know in what direction to move. And I think that we're just seeing a lot more of it because anxiety and fear, they're one of those things that, for the most part, if it's low enough, we're able to keep control of it. So for me, again, with my anxiety around roller coasters, if I'm not at Six Flags or any other amusement park, I'm not going to be fearful of roller coasters.
Right.
But once I'm approaching that, then it may be a bit more difficult for me. But if every single day I was faced with a roller coaster, there'd be a lot more anxiety that you'd be seeing from me because of the fact there's a lot more anxiety provoking things just in our world here and now. I think people are experiencing it more, and it's a lot more difficult for them to hold down. It's in their faces a lot more, and so they have to deal with it a lot more.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I was thinking as you were talking about that, I thought maybe in some ways, like I have grandchildren and I'm thinking they're going to probably forget, they had to wear their masks and all that stuff to school, but I'm thinking it'll probably be where if they have a few days of, years of normalcy, that'll kind of fade. And then as adults, we're probably better equipped, but it is that middle school, teenage years where their life got, was very much changed, and all of our, and it affects them more. So yeah, it makes sense that we had more substance use and all of that. So okay, so one of the other things that I noticed is that you focus a little bit on harm reduction when appropriate. And so can you just talk a little bit about harm reduction and the benefits of it and that kind of thing?
Sure. So when someone steps into my office, I cannot necessarily make the assumption that they're stepping into my office because they are ready to change, that they want to change the way that they've been living life with substances. I'm not necessarily making that assumption. The assumption that I'm making is that someone is coming in and they're curious about what things could be if they looked at things differently, but not necessarily committed to making any sort of change at that point in time. When it comes to substances, our approach, or the way that we're thinking about someone coming in like that, is we may be thinking of more of a harm reduction approach, in the sense that, or the way that, that I think about it is, I want to continue using, but I don't want all the detrimental effects that have come from using thus far. So I want to be thoughtful about the way in which I'm using. I want to make more plans about how I'm using substances. I want to make sure that I'm being safe when I'm using substances, so that I can continue living life. I can continue being curious about a bunch of different things, but not necessarily say, I am done. Like, this is it for me. Yeah. And my goal is just to work with people who may want to take that approach. Ultimately, I try to meet people wherever they are. If you stepped into my office, then that's a great first step, and we can go wherever you want to go or not want to go. In my opinion, I just want to be as helpful as possible. So if someone is coming in and they want to continue using, I want to make sure that they're able to they're able to continue coming into my office on a weekly basis. I want to make sure as much as possible that they're able to stay alive. So if they want to continue using, I want to make sure that you're doing so in a safe way. And so we'll come up with a plan on how to do that.
That's yeah, I know, I like that. And I think that whole idea of options, the idea that if kids are here, especially young people, you think, okay, if I have to be, there's a message like I have to be sober for the rest of my life, and that's the only path I have to change. Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, a lot of the guys I know, no. So wonderful that you're doing that. And I know that's out more with more people. And I think it makes sense to just take it step by step and see where it goes. And, some people can end up managing it sometimes, they can get their lives together or whatever. So,
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you have a new Invitation to Change family group coming up, which is very exciting. So do you want to tell parents about that, or family members about that, and a little bit about what the workshop's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So June 24th and 25th, we will be having a workshop for family members who are interested in learning more about the Invitation to Change. So we'll be going more in depth on the 4 tenets that I spoke about earlier: understanding, awareness, action, and practice, teaching folks how to understand. What are the things that they need to focus on in understanding? How to understand their loved ones, and maybe even how to understand why they, the caregiver, the parent, the family member, may be acting in the way that they are, increasing their own awareness. So helping them to understand that they're part of the change process too, they being the caregiver or family member, and that if they're going to help their loved one sustain change or move towards change, it means that they also have to be taking care of themselves, and they have to be willing to accept the different things that come with that package. And then how to enact all of this stuff. How do I become more effective with the way that I communicate with my adolescent? How can I really reinforce the behaviors that I want to see, as opposed to not reinforce the behavior that I don't want to see? And how do I go about practicing all of that? And what resources or tools are out there for me? So being able to provide all of that information over that 2 day span, for any family member who's interested in learning a little bit more. And honestly, this could be just for family members. It could be for people who have heard about this and maybe interested in learning a little bit more about it. Whoever may be interested, honestly, can come on down and take a look at what we're doing and learn a little bit more.
Wonderful. And I always feel too, for parents, especially, well, for at any stage, but to just take a couple days out of your life and get a strong foundation on how you can move. I mean, it's so beneficial in the long run. I think, I can't encourage parents to come enough. It will change the way you think about it. It will change the way you approach it. And I think, all the craft and invitation change I have found so beneficial. So you guys are doing great work there. I do appreciate it.
Thank you
And I
so
know,
much.
yeah, and it's fun to see family members. In fact, I talked to a mom actually today who I just was the first time, and she goes, "Oh, I've just downloaded the ITC guides." And I thought, and that was actually one of the first parents who's already on that. Some of them had already done Beyond Addiction, or they'd done 20-minute guide, but so that's good. It's getting out there. So, okay. So any last thoughts for parents concerned about their teens or young adults that you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few years ago, I did a talk with a colleague, and one of the questions that came up at the end of the talk was, is there a point where I give up hope? And the question I think touched me, because I can understand this feeling of not knowing what to do, trying everything that you tried, and feeling as if you're getting nowhere. And I answered that question saying, absolutely not. There's there's never a bad time to help. There are always going to be options out there. Just because you haven't heard of it yet, or you weren't aware of it, you just learned about the invitation to change now. This can be I think a really helpful tool for families of adolescents who may be struggling with substances. But it's about maintaining that hope, right? Maintaining the idea that there is something that can help me help my loved one with this thing that they've been having a really hard time with, but then also help me too, as their caregiver, as their parent, as their guardian. And it's the maintenance of that hope over time. I think that's the thing that helps folks out the most. So being able to, again, take care of yourself, pour into yourself as much as possible to maintain that hope and do the things that need to be done in order to help your loved one. And also that there isn't just one road in order to get that person functioning more effectively, that there are many different roads that they can take, and it can look many different ways. And we have to be open to accepting that what I may want may not be exactly what my loved one wants. But if I'm able to help them to get to a place where they're functioning more effectively, where they're able to live their life towards their values, then those are the things that are most important. So continue to be encouraged, continue to fight for your loved one, continue to push them to move towards change in healthy and effective ways.
Wonderful. I love that. And I think one of the things that is one of the big pluses for this whole, evidence-based approach, craft, invitation, change, all of it, is that it does give parents so much more hope that not only it empowers parents and you feel like you can actually do something, and that you also can feel better about it. You don't have to, you can feel better about yourself no matter what happens. But I think the chances are so much better that your child will come around too, or any loved one will come around too when you're practicing these ideas. So all good. Thank you so much, Jarell, for coming. I really appreciate your time. And I think parents are going to love this interview and hearing what you have to say. And, hopefully more of us will join us on that. But even if not, they're going to hear this information and get the tools. So that's
Absolutely.
all good. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.